The wokeness that is upon us, the critical race theory, the self-loathing, it's been building up for a while, more than 20 years. I started to see it when I was a student in the 1990s. 9/11 was actually a key moment in that, an inflection point. I'm not sure if we knew it then. I could see some of it at the time. I remember I read something not in 2001 after 9/11. That's when America was attacked, the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, the plane over Pennsylvania. But I remember reading something, I think it was 2002, in The Independent, a UK paper I read online. In 2002, there was a terrorist attack in Bali, which is an Indonesian island with a well-known tourism industry. A bomb blew up a nightclub, so obviously they were targeting foreigners, tourists. 88 Australians were killed, 23 Brits, many others, obviously some Indonesians too. The UK would later get their own special attack in 2005, which they still call their 7/7 bombings, a series of attacks including on their subway. And Madrid, Spain had the same subway attacks a year earlier. I think there was some moral clarity back then before we became numb to all this, before we became tired of all this, and so we accepted all this. And I read something by Howard Jacobson, who I had never heard of before, in The Independent, and he's a Jew, as you might have guessed by the name, and the way he talked about it tapped into a Jewish way of thinking, of people hating you and you hating yourself. I know that sounds neurotic and boring and like a Woody Allen movie, but I think our entire intellectual class today is infected with that way of thinking. And here was a guy who could see it in himself, and he talked about it clearly. I want to read some of this to you, most of it to you, 20 years after I read it, because I think about this article a lot. Then I want to tell you some good news, bad news, how we Canadians hate ourselves, but how those who have come here haven't yet learned to hate us. So here's the article, Choking in the Stink of Our Own Self-Hatred. Now this website says 2014, but I can tell you I read it right after the Bali bombing. Let me read most of it to you, but please stay with me because I really do have news for you too. Let me give it a shot. What did Cain think? We know what he said. He said he was not his brother's keeper and that his punishment was more than he could bear. But what did he think? I'll tell you, he thought he had done a heinous thing. Why invoke brother keeping at this hour unless you understand brother keeping to be sacrosanct? By his shamed denial of the obligations of humanity, the first murderer proclaims the wrongness of murder. It's very interesting, and I think he's right. He had a guilty look to him, but look at what Jacobson does next. In this, he is more morally refined than many who take life. What there is no sign of in his thinking is that he was right to kill his brother, that it was brought about by the inequality of things, God's preference for Abel's incense and unfair distribution of the goods of Eden, or Israel's moving its tanks into Hebron. Many are the causes of our discontents, but murder in the heart is murder in the heart. He's a good writer, isn't he? An unfair distribution of the goods of Eden. He's funny. But look at this next part. I think this is a smart man writing this. And Abel, what do we suppose was going through his mind as his brother rose up and slew him? That in some labyrinthine way, it was all his fault? That he had brought his brother's violence down upon himself? That there is no doing without our calling for it to be done? Is Abel the first instance, in literature at least, of Jewish self-hatred? Okay, so here's the Jewish part, but bear with me. I'm telling you that we're all infected with this kind of neurotic self-hatred now. That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.